Today is the 21st of September 2014. My name is Norbert Meyn and I'm here to talk to Dame Janet Baker. Welcome, Dame Janet, to the Royal College of Music.
Thank you, thank you.
We're here today to talk about émigré musicians from Germany and Austria and the role they played in your life. But would it be possible to start with a few questions about your own background?
Yes, indeed.
So could you start by telling us where and when you were born?
I was born in 1933 in Yorkshire, the north of England, a little village just outside Doncaster. I spent most of my young life, though, in the city of York. I can't remember the very early part, but we went to York when I was 2, and I stayed there until I became a music student in London at the age of 20. So I'm Yorkshire.
Could you say a few words about your parents? Were they musical?
Not in what I now consider the meaning of the word. They were interested in music. We didn't have a lot of music in the house. It was wireless or radio in those days. My father sang in a choir. My mother had a lovely voice, and I suppose my instrument, strictly speaking, came from her side of the family, because she couldn't sing, but her mother had a wonderful voice, and one traces the actual instrument ability down her side of the family. But she was more interested in the theatre. But my father sang in a choir.
And how did you start singing?
In the church. I joined the church choir when I was 9 years old, after pestering the vicar. I didn't see why I shouldn't have girls in the choir, and eventually he decided he would have girls in the choir. So my first training was with church music, which was a sort of background which remained with me all my working life.
And what kind of musical training did you have, apart from the choir singing, before you moved to London?
I studied privately with 2 teachers, both of whom were helpful and didn't do damage, which is already saying very fortunate things. I studied piano and thought I would apply to either one of the academies, but at the time I didn't make enough research into what was required, and I thought, I'm never going to get into that place, never. So I didn't bother to apply. I thought it was a waste of time. Having grade 8 or 9 or whatever it is in piano, I didn't think that was enough. So my parents didn't know anything about it either. We were terribly ignorant about the whole thing. But I did have private lessons from the age of 18, and the school I was at was very musical. And the 2 teachers I had in the north were, they didn't teach me much, but they didn't teach me bad habits either. So when I came to London, that was already a great advantage. If you get with the wrong teacher, it can be awful.
And I understand you worked in a bank for a while?
Yes, I did. That's how I earned my living, you see, when I came to London.
And did you get involved in performances in Yorkshire before you came to London?
Very much so, because I belonged to something called the Leeds Philharmonic Choir, which is a very big choral society. In the north of England in those days, we rather specialised in very, very large choruses. There was the Huddersfield chorus, of course, the very famous one. But Leeds also had a triennial festival and a normal choir for ordinary performances outside that. So I applied to join it, and that again was a very useful learning experience, learning to sing with other people, picking up music quickly, and getting to know the repertoire.
And then you met your teacher, Helene Isepp. How did that come about?
Well, that's rather interesting. I was asked to sing in York Minster. There was going to be a trial concert to start the York Festival again after the war. And this was using the Leeds choir, part of the Leeds choir, and the choir master, who was then conducting it, said, there's a small solo part in the Haydn-Nelson Mass. We're getting a professional up to do the soprano. The soprano was Ilse Wolf. And we did this concert together, this professional concert in York Minster, which was very exciting. And afterwards she said, if ever you decide to come to London, here's my teacher's telephone number. So I thought, well, that's useful to have, but never in a million years did I dream that I would ever take her up on that. However, after that concert, although I had very little to sing, the choir master said to me, I really think you ought to consider trying to get some professional training. You might stand a chance of some sort of career, which really was all I needed to spark me off. And fortunately, my parents backed me very strongly. They were rather worried at the time because we were totally ignorant of what it was like to break into a profession like this. However, they decided to encourage me, and the bank sent me to London very kindly, and I went to Helene Isepp, who was Ilse Wolf's teacher.
Now, what were your lessons like with Helene Isepp, as you call her?
Well, that contact through Ilse Wolf was like going through a very important door, which I didn't, of course, appreciate at the time. But quite suddenly, from being a very naive northern girl with no experience of London or of the profession, found myself in a completely different cultural milieu. Just going to her house, meeting her, she was a formidable lady, Helene Isepp, and the whole atmosphere of her house and of the way she spoke was a total mystery to me, let's say. I'd never come across anybody like this or anybody like Ilse, but Ilse was a very warm and friendly person. She wasn't formidable. She was already advanced in her career, but meeting Mrs. Isepp was a different matter. She was the person who knew. She was going to be my teacher. And all that seemed very strange, but it also seemed very exciting to me. And I think the reason was because the Second World War was a very great factor in my life. I was 6 when it began and 12 when it ended. And during those years in York, we were bombed. My parents both had war work of some kind. My father was too old for the forces, but he was a special constable, and my mother joined the Observe, of course. So there was very much, I was very much aware of what was going on. Our school was bombed. We felt involved. And I think growing up during the Second World War was an influence that has lasted all my life. I read a lot about it, people, books like Anne Frank. I seemed to absorb in a certain way, even though I was very young, what was going on. And here, suddenly, at the age of 20, I was meeting people from the kind of background that left Austria and Germany for obvious reasons. And I suppose I was overwhelmed with not only interest, but tremendous compassion for the people to whom that enormous decision was being made. To leave one's country, to start again in another country, and to be with these people who had the background that I only had read about in books, really, was an absolute eye-opener. I went through a different door, and had I not gone through it and been privileged to have contact with a number of them, I would have been a different kind of musician, I'm absolutely certain. So not only was I glad she was Austrian because of the language and the background of that for music, but also because all the people I met through her had this charisma for me because of how we had lived through the Second World War. I felt tremendous empathy. Helene Isepp had this very European habit of asking her students every so often to perform in her drawing room for these people. A hair-raising and terrifying experience, because there they were close to you. It was a very, very hard test of willpower and nerves, but you got on and did it. Well, that sort of salon environment, again, was completely new to me. It's very exciting.
What did you find out about her story?
I didn't find out very much at all. I knew her son, of course. Her son Martin became one of my main accompanists, and he was there in the background. As time went on, he used to come into lessons and occasionally play for me. He was in the army at the time, and he'd been caught up in the army, and he'd been away, I think, at Shrewsbury at school and then to Oxford. And his sister, Constanza. Her husband was an art restorer, okay, and I remember him very well. I remember them as a group, very, very different people from anything I'd encountered before. But the actual minutiae of what had gone on, I knew the vague pattern of it, that they left and had started to build another life here. The very fact that they had, I thought, was tremendously courageous. I just couldn't imagine what it would be like to just leave everything you'd been used to, and this applies to them all, of course. How one does that, both practically and psychologically, is a total mystery. I think it must demand certain things from people which are extraordinary qualities of the human qualities of courage and imagination and a willingness to go forward somewhere so strange and so different for them and yet make new lives. So I was very much aware of that, but not of the actual finer details of what had gone on in Vienna.
You've already described this salon environment they brought with them a sense of identity, cultural identity, which they proudly continued and developed here. What were could you describe the lessons themselves? What were you required to do in the lessons, and how did that relationship develop?
As I got to know her better, she became much less formidable, and of course I stayed with her till she died. By that time I was an established singer, and she used to say to me, "What are you coming back here for?" What I was going back there for all my life, while she was still alive, was the most extraordinary technique. She had a teacher called Emmy Heim, and I think Emmy Heim, when her group dispersed, went over to either Canada or America, I'm not quite sure which. I believe. But she had been trained by Emmy Heim in a particular sort of way. In retrospect, I recognize it as a slight development of Italian bel canto. And I say slightly different because the German language is not like any other language. The Italians sing bel canto, the Germans sing their type of bel canto, the Australians sing their type of bel canto. We're all doing this, but depending on the language that you speak, it comes out differently. And what Heli was trying to do was to bring that Austrianized idea of where to place the voice and how exactly one should think about where the voice is. In other words, not in the throat, never in the throat. It it happened in some sort of magical middle place in the face and head, which of course is bel canto. There's this magic place. I still teach exactly the same thing. I was teaching last week a wonderfully gifted young singer who understood exactly what I was getting at, because she was very far forward and she was trying to sing very far back. And I suggested to her, why not try and find this sort of middle magic place, which is the home of bel canto, no matter what language you're singing in. And Helly used to have a trick saying, she used to say, to find that magic place, you need to breathe in very sharply, take a very sharp breath. And as you do that, you can feel the air hit the hard palate, like a surprise. It's that place. You're using the hard palate, but not too far back, and using all the cavities in the cheekbones and in the face, in which to manufacture the sound. And I always found, even with a heavy cold, or if I wasn't feeling well, if I practiced, as I always did before I sang, always, without any question, I would never go into anything cold. I would do my exercise in the corner of wherever I happened to be, and do this thing of breathing in very, very sharply and rediscovering that place that she talked about, and doing maybe 5-10 minutes of exercises. And that idea of the central core of sound being produced there rather than at the back or in the throat gave me a technique which lasted me over 30 years in all sorts of circumstances. You know, the technique was so healthy, it never failed me. And to be able to say that is a quite remarkable thing, I think.
Did she speak about the body as well? I mean, was her teaching focused on posture and the sort of logistics of breathing as well, in addition to the placement of the voice? Which
I don't think she dealt with very much else beside the technique. We talked a lot about the German repertoire in music, because that's what she was steeped in. But I think most of her pupils were naturally athletic looking. We were a fit group of people, and I think that is demanded by singing unequivocally. You can't do it unless you have the sort of body that responds to what the brain and the idea up here is saying. It translates naturally. It's like acting. It all translates naturally from the mind into the secure place. The body then responds naturally. It really does. I've always found this. A natural journey goes on from taking the breath low down, very low down. She did say that, you know, one breathes well as a baby does. Actually, you go back to babyhood. Very, very, very few people breathe from the right low place. But that all seemed to work for me quite naturally. And I didn't worry too much about what the body was doing. I felt always that the body followed suit from the idea that was being given to it by the brain.
Did you feel that there was a moment when the technique and, you know, your instrument as such, that when it all came together as one?
I think that's a matter of growing up. Some singers never get past the stage of worry about how to do it. And there again, I think I was so fortunate to have hit upon a technique which suited me and was explained to me in ways that I understood. I think all teachers are saying the same thing. Of course, they want a healthy, free, unencumbered sound, which you can then forget about. But the actual process of being able to forget about what's going on here is a very, very difficult one. And if there's something in the way like the body. You know, I was talking a minute ago of this marvelous translation of the whole being, part of what's coming from the idea. Some people just never get beyond that, and that I think is so terribly sad when you get a tremendous gift which doesn't feel able to leave the technique, as all instrumentalists know this from, you know, they have so many years in which to refine that they can leave it behind and think about the music. And the moment I felt I had achieved something was when I became able just to immerse myself in a score and spend my time and all my efforts trying to understand what was required of me by the composer and the poet. So I feel very fortunate that I was able to do that.
Was there a particular kind of exercise that you would always go back to?
Just this one about taking in the air, yes, to remind me, where is this coming from? Yeah. And it was like going home.
So she would, in your lessons, there would be regular exercises at the beginning, yes, of the lessons. And would that take up the majority of the lesson or just the beginning?
At the beginning, when I first went to her, of course I knew nothing, but then I knew nothing bad either. So she was starting with a clean slate. And she, I suppose, again, retrospectively, she was very keen to encourage me and thought I had some talent, because I had many more lessons than I could possibly afford. I find most great teachers do this. They see a talent and they want to encourage it, and how you pay for the lessons is a secondary thing. Again, it's a very great privilege to receive that kind of treatment. But what she did was see me, say, twice or 3 times a week. And in between that, I wasn't allowed to practice on my own for quite a long time. I used to practice with Ilse Wolf. Yes. Because Ilse was also teaching young people and established, of course, in a way that we were not. She was the oldest established pupil, so she knew what she was doing, and her career was blossoming. So the days when I wasn't with Mrs. Isepp, I was over in Ilse's studio practicing with her and being corrected all the time, which is really remarkable. I don't know anybody else, I've never talked to anybody else who had this kind of fast-track, intensive care, which didn't allow room for me to fall into bad habits. And that meant that I achieved a very healthy basic technique very, very quickly. To the extent that when I joined the Glyndebourne chorus, they wanted to give me understudies straight away. And Helly said, I don't want you singing understudies straight away. You had to tell them no, which of course I did. And I remember my fellow choristers in the Glyndebourne chorus saying, why have you given up this understudy? And I said, my teacher said I'm not ready. I obeyed her absolutely implicitly. It never occurred to me that I would do that. But you see there again, the care that was taken not to undo what I was learning and not to do damage. And she was quite right.
Did you hear from Ilse about her story? Did she talk about
No,
that?
I didn't. And Martin didn't either. I wasn't aware of what had gone on, apart from the fact that what I had read about and continue to read about, I know now much more of what had gone on and what it cost to make this decision and make this effort to start a new life, and what certain people in orchestras that I worked with numbers on their arm, you know, you'd find yourself standing next to somebody in an orchestra, and I won't mention names, but we all know who they are, and there it was. What you read about in a book, a horrendous, horrifying, terrible story, was there, stamped on somebody's arm. That is an experience and a half, I can tell you. So, although I wasn't aware of the minutiae, I was always, and still am, aware of what these people had in many cases gone through, and I could imagine what sort of sacrifice it was to them to be uprooted in this musical culture and come to a place like England, which was very different. We didn't have that kind of culture here. It was different.
Yet they had music as something that was a language that enabled them to express themselves beyond even language. So in some ways, the musicians among them had that advantage.
Yes.
And I mean, Ilse Wolf, she was a teacher here at the Royal College.
Yes.
And she used to work here as a language coach, which is now also one of the things that I do here. And I find it incredible to hear, firsthand about her and how special music must have been to her and Helene, and how strongly they managed to build what they knew and what they believed in and pass that on in a most fruitful way.
Yes. Perhaps because they were teaching music to musicians, somebody like me who knew nothing and had come from somewhere totally alien had an avenue, and I felt that. I felt accepted by them, and I think they must have also felt how strong my attitude of empathy towards them and my respect for what they were giving me. I was terribly aware of that, especially when I began to work myself in various places all over the country, in the sort of music that I'd been brought up with. The great gift this group of people brought was impeccable professional standards. And this, I think, I'm deeply grateful for to this day, to have been exposed to people who never thought of anything but achieving the very best, and any price was worth paying for that. Now, that was something I had never encountered before. Of course, I was an amateur musician as a girl, but I went forth from London, so to speak, and began my career in various places in this country, doing, as I say, the repertoire that I had grown up with, the oratorio repertoire, certain amount of opera, and Lieder, concert, recital work. And it was obvious to me that what I was trying to achieve was because of the influence I'd been getting in the 3 or 4 years since my training began, and realizing that this is not always what people are after. And it isn't a snobbery. It's a form of regarding your performances professionally with a sort of seriousness, with a sort of gravitas that nothing else but your best will do. However you feel you can achieve that, it's something, a goal you have to work towards, and nothing else will do. And my colleagues used to say to me how serious I was. They used to seem to think I had no sense of humour. It's because, to me, whatever I was producing on that platform or in that church or cathedral was a matter of life and death. And this is the kind of thing that I felt from this group. It was a matter of life and death in every sense of the word to them. And the only other places I felt it as I was younger was with Britain in Aldeburgh, who had exactly the same ethos, and at Glyndebourne, where of course it existed as well. So you can understand, I think, what an extraordinary music background I have had, with 3 lots of influences all merging into one another when nothing but the best will do. And it makes you serious because it's so hard to achieve. But nothing else is worth it. And if that makes me serious, then I'm glad I'm serious about my profession.
Now, perhaps can we talk about Gellhorn now and the other émigrés you met there?
Yeah.
Who were the...
Peter Gellhorn, of course. Peter Gellhorn was a great, great influence. He was our chorus master. Now, that was another example, you see. Nothing slipped past that man. And the way he made us work, again, I recognize the pattern over and over again, this relentless search. And of course, the Gellhorn chorus was and still is an absolute byword for excellence. And if you are there, it is a mark of your ability. Same in opera, of course. Passing Britain's examination, so to speak, is exactly the same. And the opera world, I began in the chorus as soon as Helene let me, and that again was a marvelous experience, to be so close to people like Ebert and Busch and Janisstrasse, absorbing the same kind of ideas which seemed totally normal to me. What seemed abnormal was what I remember from other places that didn't seem to be trying hard enough to me sometimes, somehow.
So there was Busch, who
Yes.
was still conducting.
Yes.
What was he like?
Carl Ebert. I didn't know Busch at all because I was in the chorus, and I mean, you could feel it. You could feel it had influence again because of the staff. I had Gui, and Peter, of course. Peter Gellhorn was the person that I was most. He was a friend, you know. The others were. Carl Ebert was terrifying. And that again, I remember Peter Gellhorn talking to me very seriously. I'd been very upset when I started to do understudies. I was sometimes called to the stage and had first-hand knowledge. Not that he treated me badly, he didn't, not at all. But I could see him and his attitude towards people whom obviously he probably thought wasn't working hard enough or for some reason. But as I say, I was very young and inexperienced, but I watched him in his dealings with other singers. And there were sometimes, he was a theatre man, of course, very, very hard, terribly hard with them. And I had not come across this before. I had not come across this absolute iron will that wanted to bend you to his idea. I just hadn't come across that. I was aware that he was a very, very great man, but I also used to think he was very cruel. And I had talks about this with Peter. He could see that I was puzzled and upset by some of the things I had seen on the stage and couldn't somehow integrate them. And I can remember his wisdom over moments like that when he tried to explain to me that very great talents, very great people, very great conductors. It's very valuable when I worked with very great conductors who could also be difficult. When people handle, the way people handle power is, well, it's one of the great temptations of the world, isn't it? Any kind of power. How do you handle power? How do you handle people under circumstances where the end result is more important than the individual? Eventually, I began to understand and realized it wasn't up to me to make judgments about anybody. He was trying to achieve what he was trying to achieve, and he would do anything to do that. Well, eventually I realized that and respected him tremendously for that. You know.
So Peter was a pianist and a conductor and a coach,
yes.
And all of those things
he was the chorus master, but of course played, and also conducted performances as well. So he was jack of all trades doesn't sound very respectful. I don't mean that. I mean, he was a very talented man in many ways. But interestingly enough, I did as a young performer a performance of Orfeo with him. He was conducting, and all of a sudden, as a conductor, I saw his personality change from being the very kind, very compassionate, but very strict chorus master to something else. He became the conductor, Peter Gellhorn, and as such assumed, it brought out of his character all the things that I'd been trying to reconcile in somebody like Ebert or you know, whoever it was who was worrying me at the time. And I could understand very much where he was coming from because he knew all about it. He knew all about it.
Now, at Glyndebourne, there was also Paul Hamburger.
I didn't work with Paul Hamburger at Glyndebourne. I was well aware of him, of course. But I was introduced to him by Leo Black, who wanted to do leader programs of music which Brahms, Schumann, Schubert, which were not very well known. And so I met Paul under those auspices. And there we have a human being of such a wonderful, warm and loving nature, with all the experience and all the technique laid out at your feet, so to speak. It always struck me, again, I was very young when I met him, when I met all these people, and it always touched me deeply that with all the people he must have worked with and all the experience that he'd had, there was never a moment when he made you feel that you were young and you were inexperienced, and there was never any, we just worked together. And the many programs I did for Leo were a marvellous exploration of music that I'd never come across before. We just used to send this list and I'd get them ready and I go, gosh, that's wonderful. Didn't know that. And we'd work together in the most harmonious and wonderful way. It was never, ever a problem. With a lot of accompanists, I find, sounds terrible to say this, accompanists practice like mad at home, and then when they come together with a voice, they are so steeped in what they have practiced and know well that they find it very, very difficult to accompany. Paul was not one of these people, and this is why I think he was one of the gifted few who could adapt to anything. And one felt totally at ease with him and exhilarated by the sort of exchange of ideas, this lack of pomposity, this lack of, well, I know more than you do, so to speak. He was so kind and so, whenever he had a suggestion to make, he could always back it up with a very good reason why. And the programs, I can remember, they were very, very, very tense, because in those days a lot of them were live. And they were just a total joy because of that attitude from him. He was a very great man and such a lovable person. But again, he embodied these qualities of generosity and humanity with the most enormous technique and talent, and it became very special. I could see, that was my other experience of somebody handling power and talent in the most humane way possible. It is possible for certain people.
As a leader coach and somebody who worked with you on the repertoire, did you find that there was something particular about, or how did he view the stories behind the songs? Obviously you must have learned a lot about the leader repertoire already from Helene Isepp.
Yes, indeed.
How would Paul compare with that? And what was it like to work on Lieder with him?
Well, this is what I can't understand again in retrospect. It's very interesting at my age to look back on my life and try and work things out. Why did that happen, and why was that such a joy, or why was that not a joy? It's very difficult to remember, because the whole experience with him, I remember as a package. There was never any work that I can remember where we did not feel together. As I said, it was an exchange of ideas, and I felt at an advantage because my teacher had been German speaking, which was a tremendous help. I think he was pleased that I could handle the German as well, so that he wasn't worried about that. We were talking about how the music went. As I was saying before, leaving technicality behind, you get towards the core of the music, the core of the phrase. And I've just felt so comfortable that if I did something, particularly on the spur of the moment, he would be there. He would somehow, by osmosis, realize where I was going at that moment, and that kind of freedom is very special. So I can't remember us sitting down and certainly not arguing about anything. There were no disagreements. There were always discussions, not all that many, because we worked through the music and got where we wanted to be. Leo in the box was very, very helpful in that kind of keeping us on the straight and narrow. We were there talking about doing the music, and he was saying, well, no, there was something happening there. He was the man who was looking after the technical, leaving us free to perform music.
I had the privilege to have coaching with Paul at the Guildhall School when I was a student there in the late 1990s. Right. And I remember him being able to sort of bring all the characters in the Lieder to life in a way that I had never encountered before. I also found that he was able to connect his imagination of the characters with the actual dynamics, especially in the score, yes. With the way the setting would highlight certain utterances yes. more than others. And somehow he didn't only demand the dynamics to be observed, but he was able to give you a spark of imagination that made it completely logical, and in fact inevitable, yes. to do exactly that. Yes. And for me that was quite a unique experience. And really? I must say I've not really found anyone who had the same joyous connection between the knowledge and the understanding and the faithfulness to the score and the composer, and this theatrical imagination and pure lust to bring things and bring human situations and human characters to life at the same yes. time.
What you're talking about, of course, is the end product of what all singers try to achieve. This freedom I'm speaking of, freedom from problems of having to do it, how to do it, must be left behind in order to achieve this, to get to this place. But once one has, if you're lucky enough to do that, I have always found the magic starts. The magic of performance, the magic of being a singer starts at that place where you can see what's happening on the page in a different way. And I think perhaps that's where we join together so harmoniously, because he may have worked with all sorts of singers at all sorts of stages, but I felt that we were on the same ground. We were looking at things from the same place. And that is what you just described, where one is free of everything except those marks on the page, and they suddenly become magical and alive in a completely different way, because what we're trying to achieve is not creativity. I have great arguments with my colleagues about this. We are not creative people. We are recreative people. And it's a question of accepting that you're never going to really enter the world of a creative mind. You can't enter the world of a poet. You can approach the doorway to that world. It's the same with the composers. It's all there on the page, but the actual thing that makes the piece of music appear from nowhere is in a place where we can't go. What we can do is to get very, very close to it and even open the door and put our heads inside. And that is enough, because the rest is done for us by them. But the privilege of being a recreative artist is precisely that you've spoken about, to somehow capture a flavour of the magic that is theirs by right and is there in the world where that belongs. I think it is the most one can hope for, and that is already a great, great privilege.
Another émigré, and this is now an émigré who chose to come to Britain at quite an early stage, and also not because he personally was persecuted, but because he just did not like what he saw in the developments in Germany, and that's Ferdinand Rauter. Yeah. Could you just share some memories of him, please?
Well, he was a great friend of Helene's, of course. He was one of that inner circle that I was privileged enough to know well, because he used to talk a lot about Engelund, whom he toured the world with and describe what she was like. Well, I met her. I met her sometimes when she came over to this country, and seeing the two of them together and hearing them reminisce. They were obviously the most amazing partnership, amazing. And there again, the warmth, the warmth of her personality and his must have been extraordinary in performance. So I was lucky enough to see them together and put them together in my mind. He formed a trio with a couple of fellow pupils, Anne Dowdall and Jeanette Sinclair. And we were all youngish students together. And he used to write things for us and set things for us. And we gathered in his flat and met his dear wife and his children, Peter and Andrea. And to be with him there, again, was a very intimate thing, because you saw what family life was like in a different way from Helle, because they were all scattered. Martin was at university, and eventually her husband died. And of course, Constanza was a lot older, and they were out in the world. But Rau's children were little, and his wife was the homemaker, and we three girls used to meet there regularly and taste that and be, entered into their family circle, which of course was exactly the right kind of atmosphere for the kind of singing he had placed in our hands. The kind of music that he was writing was home music and folk music and together music, happy music a lot too. And we worked very hard on those programs. He wrote prolifically for us, and I think we did concerts as well. Very, very unusual mixture of voices, three. I don't know of another trio of women. And this went on for some time, and it was a good learning curve. Again, picking things up, having to pick things up quite sharpish and balance yourself with other people, and just the whole ambience was another area of performance which I would not have experienced had he not included me in that group. Eventually, Jeanette was ahead of us. She eventually went into Covent Garden, and Anne, I don't know what happened to Anne. And then eventually I started to be busy as well, so we went our separate ways. It was a very touching and nostalgic year or two. I don't know how long we were together, but very memorable and something that I treasure. He's a kind, kind man. But again, you know, the kindness is tempered with this search after whatever it was, simple songs they may have been, but they had to be done impeccably.
Did you know he was a specialist on mushrooms as well?
What, grew them or ate them or what?
I think
or cooked them?
He studied them and he cooked them with passion.
Yes, he was a good cook. And he was much older than his wife as well. I think he was blossoming because he had quite young children at his age, quite unusual. But it was a lovely family group, very warm, nice.
Now you mentioned the inner circle of Helene and her environment. Who else belonged to it?
Now you're asking me, I can't remember names. A lot of them were people not actually musicians. They were people she knew in a social sense, in a wider social sense. So their faces were familiar to me, but I didn't know them well. I was too terrified as well to look closely on those occasions. They always used to report back to her, you know, what they thought, so it was like an exam. Hans Keller, I remember Hans Keller from the BBC, yes. Of course. He was an incredible influence and an incredible person. I used to have fun with Hans. People found him terrifying in his vitality and the breadth of his knowledge, of his intelligence, like sparks of electricity coming off. And I knew that. I was terrified too, but I also got on very well with him. And he used to engage me in philosophical arguments of all kinds. And I'd find myself spouting ideas, and I realized later he was just dragging these things out of me for amusement, to find out what I was going to say. And we had one argument over a table at the BBC once about, and I can't remember what the argument was about, but he said, you believe in absolutes, do you? Absolute right and wrong. And I said, yes, I certainly do. And then he was highly amused at all. I never found out what he thought. But I can see he used to get a lot of amusement from drawing me on various subjects. But again, what a contribution. What a contribution he made. Both he and his wife, of course.
Hans Keller also worked closely with Benjamin Britten.
Yes.
Did you ever witness that collaboration?
I can't remember. When I first went to Albury, of course, again, I was very small fry in the course of things and didn't get to know Ben, of course, as well as I did later on, naturally. But there were a number of people, the Hesses, the Hess family, were always there, and I knew Lawrence van der Post. A lot of people were there that I didn't really come into contact with. That you knew they were around and coming to everything. You know.
Now, Britten's connection with German music is quite extraordinary, and I recently read that in 1945 he travelled to Germany with Ifra Newman and played concerts for survivors of concentration camps. It's quite extraordinary how, you know, he also interpreted German music as a pianist, as a conductor, and there was this tremendous connection established already before or during the war, and it must have played a strong part later on for him as well.
I mean, we're talking about all these strands of talent around in those years after the war. I mean, there's been nothing like it since, and I think I've said time and time again in conversations how much we owe to that input of culture and ideas and professionalism. The way I think it must have turned this country in some way. I'm not denigrating what has gone on here. We have a wonderful musical tradition. and have had for many, many years, but it was different. And I'm not talking actually about the music tradition itself. I'm talking about the approach to performance of it. That's what amazes me, that this vision and this determination to attain something unattainable perhaps, but something that we were encouraged to strive for. It gave us, my generation, it gave us the opportunity to transfer from a national to an international world, and people began to respect English singers for the first, perhaps, you know, not for the first time, but in a way that had not been done before. And one of the marvelous things about it, in my mind, was that this gulf between concert work, recital work, which was very much done by certain people, and those people did nothing else. The oratorio performer performed oratorio and serious music. They didn't think of going on the opera stage. The opera was something else, and the culture of the opera was very, very narrow at that time. And what I gained from everybody was that all these things worked together. All of them fed each other. You didn't isolate. They all needed each other. And of course, a career needs that constant feeding from a different kind of music making in order to remain fresh and broaden you as a performer. This, I think, was one of the most valuable things about it all, that there were no categories. You aren't an oratorio singer or an opera singer or a concert singer. You are a singer, and you should be able to at least explore all those avenues. Otherwise, there's something lacking. And now that attitude has changed. I think to a great deal. I hope so. It certainly was a big turnaround in my time.
Otto Klemperer, he was also an émigré. Did you know that?
I think so at the time. I think I'd forgotten about that. That's another extraordinary man. I didn't know him in his prime. He must have been terror, terrifying. His reputation goes before him. Again, you know, being accepted by people like that. His physical form was in difficulty when I knew him. And one could only vaguely imagine what he must have been like in his prime. The physique in its prime must have been extraordinary, quite tremendous. But I think how wonderful it is that they felt at home in this country. That they felt they could build a life here. I wonder what it was from that point of view that they felt safer, and wanted to come here and build a new tradition. There must have been something about this country which made it possible for them to come and work. And did they actually understand what they were doing for us? I wonder. They must have known that they were pulling us up by the roots. They must have known the effect they had on us as performers, but I don't know if they ever realized how people like me felt we owe them a great, great debt. I think I felt this because of my own family experience during the war and what surrounded the war, but what they brought and what they get. The times I have said this publicly, the debt my generation owe is just irreparable, and I wonder if they ever got a whiff of that, whether they ever got any feedback. I think they would be glad to see us blossom, yes, but to feel as indebted as I certainly feel for this input is indescribable, and I wish that I'd been able to voice that when they could have benefited from it, so to speak. I hope they did realise. But the greatly touching thing to me was how people like Paul Hamburger, for instance, the acceptance of somebody who knew nothing, to be able to work at that kind of level with a mind like that, and the same goes with everybody I worked with, to be accepted on that on equal terms. How is that possible when they had come from such an extraordinarily rich and disciplined background? Maybe they were thinking that they were making an investment in the future. Well, I think the investment's paid off, because music in this country is not the same as it was.
I also wonder, there are the links between the, I mean, we've spoken about this, many of the émigrés wouldn't speak very much about their personal experience
Right.
of persecution, or not until much, much later.
Right.
Yet they certainly saw in their own experience of persecution, or through the loss of property, of family members, of their whole environment, their culture, which they had to leave behind, what barbarism the human race could get up to. And I wonder if they saw something in music and in the values of practicing music to that level, that gave them hope and something to strive for, that they saw as intensely worthwhile within the context of really a sort of global identity, which they adopted quite naturally after having to leave their national identity behind.
Yes, that's a very interesting point. And of course, the glaring example I can think of now is Barenboim using music as a healing process. It is amazing how, what other thing can we think of that has the same ability to join people, to communicate one's heart and soul at that level? I suppose the arts as a whole, that is our job, isn't it? Somehow things will survive, that values will survive, that excellence is not to be something to be ashamed of, and that hard work is necessary for anything to survive. And all those values, I think particularly when you reach old age, one sees slipping, one thinks is slipping, and is so anxious to ensure that it's not lost. But I think that's part of the human situation. Somehow or other, so far, we exist, we survive through all sorts of things, different things perhaps. But what worries me terribly is this, the responsibility of communication. When you think of the way the young speak, when they speak so quickly, they could be speaking in a different language. This, to my age group, is a very distressing and very worrying, because I do not know what they're saying to me. And in this sense, music, the language of music, is something which bypasses, thank God, bypasses that the values of music, of excellence and work and heart and soul, all allied to the physique, are still necessary. In fact, it is the prime reason, the prime necessity in order to perform at all. So one sees the Eastern people, the Eastern pianists, for instance, the growth of that, excellence in technique, and one hopes also all the rest of the culture. But that again is a different thing, isn't it? We're talking about an influx there of talent and technical ability, but the soul of Eastern music is more mysterious to us. What we benefited from with the group of people we're reminiscing about is the fact that we were so close. We have the same sort of cultural background in a way. We have the same reference points, like, well, Christianity, the art of Christianity, or which is or the Bible, or whatever. They're fundamental things that most of us relate to. And the difficulty with the Eastern mind is, I think, there isn't that similar background. There will be, presumably, one day. But that influence, that rise in technical ability, I see this with the Leeds piano. I'm patron of the Leeds piano competition. And over the years, the number of marvelous pianists from the Eastern countries has proliferated.
Asia mostly? Or?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And then occasionally you get somebody coming along who has all these qualities. They're few yet, but they're there. And so it goes on, and will go on, I hope.
We see the virtues of the integration of the cultural bridge building in this story very strongly.
Yes.
And
yes.
And we think of our time now and of the challenges that we're faced with as a global civilization. Yes. And I hope we can learn something from this very positive story of how this generation of musicians turned an experience of absolute horror into a determination to create something beautiful music in this case, and which made them really have such a powerful influence, which we are still feeling today.
Absolutely, I hope so. I hope so. One wonders sometimes. People forget, and this is one of the things I treasure from my own life, that I remember what I was given, and the importance of it. I feel very grateful for that. My lifespan as it has been in the time that I have lived it, extraordinary time. Maybe the elderly always speak like this, that they see things slipping away. What we're not so conscious of, I suppose, is what's replacing it. There must be wonderful things, I think wonderful things that people do, but we're swamped by the negatives, aren't we? And something like the growth of talent, which I see, no doubt about it, in singers, is still the exciting thing when somebody grasps, yes, I am a musician, I'm a cellist, or I'm a singer, but that's just the vehicle. What lies behind that and the way it's achieved is something much more important. And that's what I think this group of people epitomized to the most extraordinary degree, that the values they brought were everlasting.
Thank you, Janet Baker, for this conversation, for this insight into your life, into the experiences you've had, into the influences you've spoken about. And this is tremendously inspiring to me, and to hopefully many other young people. We just spoke about young talent here at the Royal College and elsewhere. Thank you very much for this
Thank you
interview.
for giving me the opportunity to do it. Thank you.
Thank you.